There's a light in the sky tonight. The same light that's been there for as long as anything human has existed. It doesn't burn like the sun. It doesn't flicker like the stars. It simply glows. Pale and patient, casting shadows that move like whispers across the earth. The moon, you've seen it 1,000 times. Maybe you've barely noticed it. Maybe you've paused beneath it, felt something stir inside, used something quiet and ancient, like a memory you can't quite place. Because the moon is more than a celestial body. It's a companion, a witness, the silent keeper of every human story ever told. But here's the question that's going to follow. Through the night, what if the ancient myths about the moon weren't just stories? What if, woven into the folklore of Greece and Egypt, the legends of the Maya and the Aboriginal Dreamtime, the songs of African tribes and the scriptures of Vedic India, what if hidden within all of that was something real? Something true? Not literal truth perhaps, but encoded knowledge. Observations, warnings, wisdom passed down through generations. Wrapped in metaphor so it could survive the ages, modern science has given us telescopes and moon landings, gravitational equations and geological surveys. We know the moon's composition, its craters, its precise distance from Earth. We've walked on it. We've brought back its rocks. And yet, the more we learn, the more mysteries emerge. Strange anomalies, unanswered questions, patterns that don't quite fit. And in those gaps, those quiet spaces between what we know and what we don't, the old myths begin to whisper. Tonight, let yourself drift. Let the boundaries between past and present blur. Let the moon be what it was to your ancestors, not just a rock in space, but a mystery, a puzzle, a mirror reflecting truths we may have forgotten how to see, because if we listen closely enough to the stories, if we stop dismissing them as primitive superstition and start reading them as humanity's first science, we might discover that the ancients were watching the moon far more carefully than we ever imagined, and they may have been trying to tell us something we're only now beginning to understand. Long before there were laboratories or equations, before the written word or even permanent settlements, humans looked up at the night sky and asked the simplest, most profound question. Why? Why does the moon change shape? Why does it vanish for 3 nights and then return? Why does the ocean pull toward it? Why do women's bodies follow its rhythm? Why do certain animals behave differently when it's full? They had no instruments to measure, no books to reference. But they had something just as powerful: observation, memory, and the ability to weave what they saw into stories that could be passed from parent to child, generation after generation, across centuries and continents. This is where mythology begins. Not as fantasy or entertainment, but as survival. Imagine a world without calendars, without clocks, without weather forecasts or planting guides. How do you know when winter is coming? When to migrate? When to plant seeds or harvest crops? When the salmon will run or the rains will arrive? You watch the sky, and the most reliable guide in that sky, more consistent than the sun's position, more accessible than the distant stars, was the moon. Its phases repeated with stunning regularity. New moon, crescent, first quarter, gibbous, full, and back again. Roughly 29.5 days, over and over, forever. It was the universe's clock, visible to everyone, requiring no special knowledge or tools to read, so humans built their first calendars around it. Lunar months became the foundation of timekeeping across nearly every ancient culture. The word month itself comes from moon, a linguistic fossil from when our ancestors measured their lives by its light. But here's where it gets interesting. These early people weren't just tracking time. They were noticing correlations. The moon waxed, and the tides rose. The moon was full, and certain fish spawned. Women's cycles aligned with lunar months. Some plants seemed to grow better when seeds were planted during specific phases. Animals behaved strangely during eclipses. They didn't understand why not in the way we do now. the gravitational pull, and circadian biology. But they observed the patterns, and they encoded them into stories. The moon became a goddess of fertility, because people noticed the connection between lunar cycles and reproduction. It became a god of the tides because sailors watched its influence on the ocean. It became associated with madness and transformation, lunacy, because behavior seemed to shift under its light. These myths weren't random. They were data storage. Wisdom disguised as narrative so it could be remembered, repeated, and preserved in an age before writing. And here's the truly fascinating part. When you look at lunar myths from around the world, cultures separated by oceans and millennia, with no possible contact, you find the same themes appearing again and again. The moon as traveler, as healer, as trickster, as guardian of the night, as measurer of time. Why would people who've never met tell such similar stories? Perhaps because they were all watching the same moon, observing the same phenomena, drawing the same conclusions from the same sky. Or perhaps they were all remembering something even older, something inherited from the earliest humans who first gazed upward and wondered, let's take a journey, not through space, but through stories, across continents and centuries, into the sacred texts and oral traditions of cultures that shaped the ancient world. In ancient Sumer, in the cradle of civilization between the Tigris and Euphrates, the moon god Nano, also called Sin, was among the most revered deities. He was depicted as a wise elder with a flowing beard of lapis lazuli, sailing across the night sky in a boat. Nana measured time. He governed the rhythms of life and death. Eclipses were interpreted as attacks on him by demons, and priests performed elaborate rituals to protect him. Travel west to Egypt. There the moon was divided among gods: Thoth, the ibis-headed keeper of wisdom and writing, who regulated the lunar calendar, and Khonsu, the youthful wanderer, who journeyed across the night sky, protecting travelers and healing the sick. The Egyptians believed the moon's light had medicinal properties. Rituals performed under a full moon were considered especially potent. Across the Mediterranean to Greece, the goddess Selene rode her silver chariot pulled by winged horses, with her light softer and more mysterious than her brother Helios's son. And Artemis, wild goddess of the hunt, bore the crescent moon on her brow, protector of women, guardian of childbirth. Fierce and UN-tamed, sail across the Atlantic to the Americas. The Maya tracked the moon with obsessive precision, developing calendars accurate to within minutes per year. They depicted the moon goddess Ixchel with a rabbit companion, the same rabbit the Chinese saw on the lunar surface. Two cultures, an ocean apart, both seeing a rabbit in the moon's shadows. Coincidence? Or a shared human tendency to find patterns in chaos? In China, the story of change tells of a woman who drank the elixir of immortality and floated to the moon, where she lives in eternal solitude with only the jade rabbit for company. The moon became a symbol of separation, longing. Reunion themes that permeate Chinese poetry and art to this day. Travel to India. In Vedic tradition, Chandra, the moon deity, governs the mind and emotions. He rides a chariot pulled by 10 white horses or an antelope holding a lotus. He is married to the 27 nakshatras, the lunar mansions, each representing a night of the moon's journey. His waxing and waning are explained as the result of a curse. He neglected his other wives to favor Rohini, and thus he must perpetually gain and lose his light. Journey south to Africa. Among the Khoi and San peoples, the moon dies and is reborn each month. It's a symbol of resurrection, a promise that death is not final. The Zulus celebrate the new moon with joy, seeing it as a fresh beginning. Cross the Pacific to Australia. In Aboriginal Dreamtime stories, the moon is often male, a contrast to many other cultures, and is associated with fertility, death, and the afterlife. Some stories tell of the moon's role in bringing death into the world, while others depict him as a guide for spirits. Do you see the pattern? Despite vast differences in language, geography, and culture, these myths share core elements. The moon is alive. It travels. It transforms. It governs cycles of life, death, and rebirth. It influences fertility, tides, time, emotion. It is connected to wisdom, healing, transformation, and mystery. These aren't coincidences. They're observations dressed in metaphor, because every culture that watched the moon carefully enough noticed the same things. Its phases repeated. Its light affected the world. It was tied to rhythms they couldn't ignore: oceanic, biological, emotional. And so they all told versions of the same story, each in their own voice, each shaped by their own landscape and values. But beneath the surface, the message was consistent. Pay attention to the moon. It matters. And perhaps there was something more. Something they saw or sensed that we, with our electric lights and indoor lives, have lost the ability to perceive. Time is invisible. You can't hold it, touch it, or see it. But you can measure it if you know where to look. For most of human history, the moon was where we looked. Before mechanical clocks, before sundials even. The moon was the most reliable way to track the passage of days. Its cycle from new moon to full and back again takes approximately 29.5 days. 12 lunar months equal 354 days. Close enough to a solar year that early calendars could function reasonably well using lunar months. With occasional adjustments, nearly every ancient civilization developed lunar calendars first. The Hebrew calendar, the Islamic calendar, the Hindu Panchang, the Chinese calendar, all rooted in the moon's phases. Why? Because the moon was accessible. You didn't need to be a priest or scholar to read it. Anyone could step outside and see whether the moon was waxing or waning, full or dark. It was democracy in timekeeping, universal, egalitarian, visible to all. But the moon's influence went deeper than mere date keeping. Farmers noticed that certain crops seemed to respond to lunar phases. Seeds planted just after a new moon, during the waxing period, germinated faster and grew stronger. Root vegetables thrived when planted during the waning moon. Was this superstition? For a long time, modern agriculture dismissed it as such, but recent studies have found correlations between lunar phases and soil moisture, gravitational pull on water within plant cells, and even subtle changes in Earth's magnetic field. The ancients may not have understood the mechanisms. They observed the effects, encoded them into planting rituals and agricultural folklore. Fishermen and sailors certainly knew the moon's power. Tides are caused by the moon's gravitational pull, a fact modern science confirmed, but which ancient peoples understood intuitively. They knew the highest tides came during full and new moon spring tides. They knew the gentlest tides came during quarter moon's neap tides. Their lives depended on this knowledge, and they enshrined it in myths of moon gods controlling the seas. And then there's biology. Countless species synchronize their reproductive cycles to the moon. Coral reefs spawn during specific lunar phases. Sea turtles return to beaches to lay eggs according to the moon's calendar. Certain fish, crabs, and marine worms time their mating to lunar light. Even some insects and birds exhibit lunar rhythms. Humans aren't exempt. Women's menstrual cycles average 28 days, remarkably close to the lunar month. Before artificial lighting disrupted our circadian rhythms, humans slept differently, depending on the moon's phase. Studies of pre-industrial societies show that people tend to go to bed later and wake earlier during full moons, and sleep more deeply during new moons. The ancients noticed all of this. They wove it into their myths and rituals. Lunar festivals marked planting and harvest. Childbirth rituals invoked moon goddesses. Healing ceremonies were timed to specific phases. Initiations, marriages, funerals aligned with the lunar calendar. These weren't arbitrary choices. They were attempts to harmonize human activity with the natural rhythms they observed in the world around them. But here's where the myths become especially intriguing. Some stories describe not just the moon's cycle, but specific, unusual events, eclipses, strange lights, changes in brightness or color, odd behavior in the sky. And those stories, those accounts of anomalies, may contain the most surprising truths of all. The moon is predictable, reliable. It follows mathematical patterns so precise we can calculate its position centuries into the future or past. But every now and then, something unusual happens. Something that breaks the pattern. Something that would terrify people who depended on the moon's constancy. And when those moments occurred, they were remembered. Written into scripture, carved into stone, passed down as warnings or prophecies. Take lunar eclipses to modern eyes. An eclipse is beautiful, a celestial alignment, perfectly explainable by orbital mechanics. But imagine experiencing one with no forewarning, no scientific context. The moon, your reliable guide through the night, suddenly begins to darken. A shadow creeps across its face. And then, instead of silver light, the moon glows blood red, an eerie crimson that stains the landscape. Cultures worldwide developed myths to explain this terror. In Mesopotamia, eclipses meant the moon god Sin was under attack by demons, and rituals were urgently performed to save him. In ancient China, a celestial dragon was devouring the moon, and people banged drums and gongs to scare it away. In Norse mythology, the wolf Hati was swallowing the moon, a precursor to Ragnarok, the end of the world. These myths served a purpose. They provided a framework for understanding fear. They turned chaos into narrative, but they also recorded the event. Ancient astronomers became skilled at predicting eclipses. The Babylonians could forecast them with impressive accuracy. The myths, then, were both explanation and archive. But eclipses aren't the only anomalies mentioned in ancient texts. Medieval European chronicles describe something called transient lunar phenomena, brief flashes of light, glowing patches, or dark spots appearing and disappearing on the moon's surface. In 1178, English monks reported seeing a flaming torch on the moon, along with the moon splitting and spewing fire. Modern scientists believe this may have recorded a massive meteor impact that created the crater, now called Giordano Bruno, Chinese. Astronomers meticulously documented guessed stars, what we now know as supernova and comets, but they also recorded odd lunar events, unusual brightness, strange colorations, and inexplicable changes in the moon's appearance. Some indigenous American tribes tell stories of a time when the moon was brighter, or closer, or moved differently across the sky. Pacific Islander myths describe the moon falling or changing its path. Aboriginal Dreamtime stories speak of the moon being created during the dreamtime, itself not as something that has always existed, but as something that came into being. Could these be racial memories? Distorted accounts of real events from humanity's deep past? We know the moon hasn't always been where it is now. It's gradually moving away from Earth at a rate of about 3.8 centimeters per year. Billions of years ago, the moon was much closer, so close that tides would have been monumental. Days much shorter, and the moon itself would have appeared enormous in the sky. Could ancient myths of a closer moon or a brighter moon be inherited memories from a time when early hominids, or even pre-human ancestors, experienced a different lunar reality? It sounds far-fetched, but oral traditions can preserve information for astonishing lengths of time. Aboriginal Australian stories have been found to accurately describe coastlines that were submerged at the end of the last ice age over 10,000 years ago. What if some lunar myths are similarly ancient? What if they're not describing the moon as it is now, but as it was tens of thousands or even millions of years ago? It's passed down through countless generations until the details blurred, but the essence remained. It's a tantalizing possibility. One that suggests myths may not just be stories, but something far more valuable: humanity's oldest records, coded, distorted, but still carrying whispers of truth, and those whispers grow louder when we consider not just what the ancients saw, but what they felt the moon's influence on the mind, body, and spirit. There's a word in English that ties madness to the moon: lunacy. It comes from the Latin luna, meaning moon. The idea is ancient and widespread that the full moon affects the mind, making people erratic, violent, or irrational. Is it true? Modern studies are mixed. Most large-scale research finds no statistical correlation between lunar phases and psychiatric hospital admissions, crime rates, or emergency room visits. And yet, the belief persists. Police officers, nurses, and emergency workers will often swear that full moon nights are busier, stranger, more chaotic. Perhaps it's confirmation bias. Or perhaps there's a subtler truth buried beneath the folklore. We know the moon affects life on Earth. Tides are the most obvious example. The moon's gravity literally pulls the oceans, creating rhythmic rises and falls that shape coastal ecosystems. But the effects go deeper. Certain marine species are so synchronized to lunar cycles that they seem almost telepathically connected to the moon. The grunion fish of California beaches time their spawning, runs to the highest tides following full and new moons. Palalo worms in the South Pacific swarm to reproduce on a single night each year, determined by the lunar calendar. Coral reefs across the tropics spawn simultaneously during specific lunar phases, releasing eggs and sperm in such quantities that the ocean turns milky. Land animals, too, respond to the moon. Studies have found that lions hunt more successfully during the week after a full moon, when darkness returns earlier and prey are less cautious. Certain moths and beetles use moonlight for navigation. Badgers alter their foraging behavior based on lunar brightness, and humans, we're not immune. Research has shown that before the advent of electric lighting, human sleep patterns varied with the moon. In pre-industrial societies studied today, people sleep less and go to bed later in the nights leading up to a full moon, even in modern urban environments. Some studies detect slight but measurable changes in sleep. Architecture during different lunar phases. Women's menstrual cycles, averaging 28 days, have long been associated with the moon's 29.5-day cycle. While the correlation isn't perfect for every individual, similarity is striking enough to suggest an evolutionary connection. Some researchers theorize that before artificial light, women's cycles may have been more tightly synchronized with lunar phases, with ovulation tending to occur during full moons and menstruation during new moons. The ancients didn't have scientific instruments to measure these effects, but they noticed them. They saw that women's bodies followed lunar rhythms. They observed that certain animals behaved differently under moonlight. They felt subjectively that the full moon brought a different energy, more wakefulness, more emotional intensity, more vividness in dreams, and so they created myths to encode this knowledge. Moon goddesses governed fertility and childbirth. Lunar deities were associated with dreams, intuition, and the subconscious. Werewolf legends warned of transformation under the full moon, perhaps a metaphor for behavioral changes, heightened aggression, or altered states of consciousness. These myths weren't lies. They were observations wrapped in narrative. Attempts to describe phenomena that were real but not yet understood. And some myths describe an even stranger possibility that the moon itself may have changed over time. That the sky our ancestors saw was not quite the same as the one we see tonight. What if the moon hasn't always been there? It sounds absurd. The moon is such a permanent fixture in our sky, so constant and reliable that imagining its absence feels impossible. But scattered across the world's mythologies are strange, unsettling stories that suggest the moon, or at least our relationship with it, may have been different. In the distant past, the ancient Greeks had a curious legend about a people called the Proserpines. Those who lived before the moon, according to Apollonius of Rhodes and other classical sources. The Arcadians claimed to be descendants of people who existed before the moon appeared in the sky. It's a baffling claim. What could it mean? Similarly, some Zulu traditions speak of a time before the moon when the sky was different. Certain South American indigenous myths describe the moon being brought or placed in the sky by creator gods, implying it wasn't always there, of course. We know from science that the moon has existed for over 4 billion years, almost as long as Earth itself. So what are these myths describing? One possibility. They're not talking about the moon's creation, but about its visibility or prominence. Perhaps there was a time when atmospheric conditions, or Earth's axial tilt, or some other factor made the moon less visible or less significant to early humans. Or perhaps these are cultural memories of migration groups moving from one hemisphere to another. where the moon's path across the sky appears different, but there's another, more intriguing interpretation. The moon is slowly, inexorably moving away from Earth. Every year, it drifts about 3.8 centimeters farther. This means that in the deep past, the moon was closer, much closer, 4 billion years ago. When the moon first formed, likely from debris after a Mars-sized object collided with Earth, it was perhaps 15 times closer than it is today. It would have appeared enormous in the sky, dominating the horizon. Tides would have been catastrophic, towering waves reshaping coastlines daily. Days were much shorter, perhaps only 6 hours long, because Earth was spinning faster. Even within more recent but still ancient time frames, the moon was noticeably closer. 1 million years ago, it was about 30 kilometers closer than today. 10,000 years ago, within the span of human civilization, it was about 380 meters closer. That's not much in cosmic terms, but over deep time. These differences add up. Could myths of a changing moon reflect inherited memories from tens of thousands of years ago? When the moon appeared slightly larger, slightly brighter? When tides were higher and the moon's gravitational influence on Earth was subtly stronger? There's also the phenomenon of the moon's libration and orbital perturbations, which cause slight variations in its path and appearance over long cycles. Ancient astronomers, watching the sky night after night for generations, might have noticed irregularities that we, with our indoor lives and electric lights, no longer observe. Some researchers have pointed to geological evidence that the moon's orbit wasn't always as stable as it is now. Tidal patterns preserved in ancient rock formations suggest variations over millions of years. If early humans or their ancestors witnessed periods of unusual tidal activity or strange lunar behavior due to orbital shifts, those memories could have been preserved in myth. And then there are the eclipse cycles. The fact that the moon and sun appear almost exactly the same size in our sky, allowing for perfect to see total solar eclipses, is a temporary cosmic coincidence. In the distant past, the moon was larger and eclipses would have been different. In the distant future, the moon will be smaller and total solar eclipses will no longer occur. Could myths of the moon changing reflect awareness of this slow transformation? It's speculative, yes, but it's also humbling, because it suggests that myths may be far older, far more sophisticated than we give them credit for. They may be humanity's deepest memory, fragmented, symbolic, but still carrying echoes of truths we've forgotten. But not all lunar myths are about observation or biology. Some reach into stranger, more mystical territory. They describe the moon not as an object, but as a threshold in cultures around the world. The moon is seen as a gateway between worlds, a bridge connecting the living and the dead, the earthly and the divine, the conscious and the subconscious. In ancient Egyptian belief, the moon was associated with the afterlife. Souls of the deceased were thought to travel through the lunar realm on their journey to the stars. The god Thoth, in his role as psychopomp, guided spirits through the night sky. Using the moon as a way station between worlds, Celtic traditions spoke of the moon gate, a doorway accessible during certain lunar phases, particularly the dark of the new moon, when the barrier between the mortal world and the other world grew thin. Druids performed rituals during these times, seeking visions or communing with spirits in Hindu and Buddhist cosmologies. The moon is associated with the mind specifically, the subconscious, and the realm of dreams. Chandra, the moon god, governs Manas, the mental plane, the seat of emotion and intuition. Meditation practices timed to lunar phases are believed to enhance spiritual insight. Indigenous Australian Dreamtime stories describe the moon as a connector between the physical world and the dreamtime itself, eternal, non-linear realm where creation is ongoing and time flows differently. The moon is a reminder that there are layers to reality, dimensions beyond the visible. Why this consistent association between the moon and the liminal, the mystical, the unseen? Perhaps because the moon governs the night hand. The night has always been humanity's gateway to the unknown. In darkness, the boundaries of the self soften. The rational mind quiets. Dreams arrive. And for most of human history, the moon was the only light in that darkness. It's the only guide through the shadowy hours. The moon also has a reflective quality, both literally and metaphorically. It doesn't generate its own light. It mirrors the sun's. This makes it a symbol of reflection, introspection, the inner life. Just as the moon shows us the sun's light transformed, softer, and more mysterious, so too does it represent the way we process and reflect on our experiences. Psychologically, the moon has been linked to the feminine, the emotional, the receptive, not because these traits are inherently female, but because the moon's energy is cyclical, intuitive, tidal. It waxes and wanes. It hides and reveals. It governs rhythms and cycles, not linear progressions. Carl Jung, the psychologist, saw the moon as a symbol of the unconscious mind, the hidden depths of the psyche where dreams, its archetypes and instincts reside. He believed lunar myths were humanity's way of mapping the inner landscape, using the sky as a mirror for the soul. And maybe that's the deepest truth hidden in the myths, that the moon isn't just out there, it's in here. In our biology, our psychology, our dreams and fears and longings. We are, in some fundamental way, lunar creatures. Children of the moon, and the stories we tell about it are ultimately stories we tell about ourselves. So what are we to make of all this? The myths, the correlations, the strange consistencies across cultures, the possibility that encoded within ancient stories is real, observable knowledge about the moon, the earth, and the rhythms of life. One thing seems clear. Our ancestors were paying attention. Far more than we do now. They watched the sky every night. They noticed patterns, correlations, anomalies. And because they didn't have written records or only rudimentary ones, they encoded what they learned into stories. Stories that could be remembered, repeated, and passed down through generations. These myths were mnemonic devices, memory palaces built from narrative. The characters, the plots, the symbols, all of it served to preserve information in a form that could survive the erosion of time. And perhaps that information is more valuable than we've realized. Modern science has confirmed many things. The ancients encoded in myth that the moon governs tides, that it influences biological cycles, that its phases affect sleep and behavior, that eclipses follow predictable patterns, that the moon is slowly receding from Earth. But there may be more. Subtle patterns we haven't yet quantified. Environmental cycles we've lost touch with because of artificial lighting and indoor lives. Psychological or even spiritual dimensions of lunar influence that don't fit neatly into materialist frameworks, but were nevertheless real to those who experienced them. By dismissing myths as just stories, we risk losing access to thousands of years of accumulated human observation. By reading them as symbolic archives, we might rediscover knowledge that's still relevant, perhaps more relevant now than ever as we grapple with disconnection from natural rhythms and the consequences of ignoring the cycles that govern life on Earth. The moon is still there, still watching, still exerting its subtle, undeniable influence. And the myths are still whispering. If we're willing to listen, the night is deep now. The world has grown still. If you look up, really look up, you'll see it. The moon, glowing softly, just as it has for billions of years. Just as it did when the first humans gazed upward and wondered. It's just as it will long after we're gone. It doesn't matter where you are. The moon shines on all of us, on cities, and deserts, oceans and mountains, the living and the dreaming. It connects every moment of human history, every ancient civilization, every forgotten tribe, every person who has ever paused beneath its light and felt that quiet, inexplicable pull. The myths we've journeyed through tonight aren't just relics of a superstitious past. They're testaments to curiosity, observation, and the deep human need to understand our place in the cosmos. They're our ancestors' way of saying, this matters. Attention. Remember. And maybe that's the real truth hidden in the myths. Not that the moon is a god or a portal or a living being, but that it's a teacher, a reminder that we are part of something larger, that we live within rhythms and cycles that extend far beyond our individual lives, that the universe is not chaotic or meaningless, but ordered, patterned, alive with connection. The moon taught us to measure time, to track seasons, to navigate oceans, to understand our own bodies and emotions. It gave us our first calendar, our first sense of cosmic order, and it still has lessons to offer. If we're willing to slow down, to step outside, to look up and simply notice. So tonight, as you drift toward sleep, let the moon watch over you. Let its light be a gentle companion in the darkness. Let it remind you that you are part of an ancient lineage, a chain of stargazers and storytellers. Stretching back to the very beginning, the myths were never lies. They were love letters. Humanity's way of saying to the moon and to each other, I see you. Remember, I will carry this forward, and beneath the same quiet moon, that's exactly what we're still doing. Rest now. The moon will be there when you wake. It always is.